So in this video, we're going to talk about hanging bear bags. And essentially, we're going to go through two different methods of hanging a bear bag in the field. They both rely on a lot of the same fundamentals as far as knots and gear. They just have a few different finishing touches that make them particularly unique in different situations. The first one we'll talk about is called the single bag hoist method. At least that's what I call it. I'm not sure what the official name is. And then we'll go into the counterbalance method. You should have watched the videos on knots already and hopefully have at least a degree of understanding of how to tie basic knots. The only knots that you'll need to know for this particular or these particular methods of hanging bear bags is actually the figure 8 on a BIGHT. And we use that because it's easy to untie but also very sturdy. The first part of hanging a bear bag is to actually choose your location. Generally, the rules of thumb along the Appalachian Trail are going to be you want the bag 12 feet off the ground, but also 6 feet from any nearby trees. And that includes the trunk, and that includes the limb that you're hanging from. So when you have your limb and you throw your rope over it, that limb is going to need to be about 20 feet high in order to accommodate for 12 feet above the bag, 12 feet above the ground and 6 feet below the limb where the bag needs to be sitting, and then 6 feet away from the trunk. So there's a couple different ways to actually get your parachute cord or your rope over the limb that you choose. I'm going to leave that up to each individual group to decide. The most common one that we generally tend to use is to find a boulder about the size of a softball, tie the parachute cord around it, and then throw the boulder over the limb. Whatever way that you guys decide to do it, ultimately you need to get your rope or your parachute cord over that limb. Essentially, in order to do this, you need your parachute cord. We're going to use, in this video, some 8mm blue cord, just because it's a little bit bigger, you can kind of see what I'm doing. And then you're going to need 2 carabiners. So the first thing you'll do is on one end of the parachute cord, you'll tie your figure 8 on a BIGHT. Once that's tied, you can take a carabiner and simply attach the carabiner to the figure 8 on a BIGHT. This is going to be what you actually hang your bags from. So I'm going to use these coat rack hooks behind me as a demonstration. Pretend that this is the limb. Pretend that this is going to be high enough and far enough away from a trunk to be appropriate. But essentially, once you have your parachute cord over the limb and you have it lowered to the ground, you will take your bag. We're going to say that this is our bag of food. You will simply clip it to the carabiner. I prefer to lock the carabiner if it has a lock on it. And then you will simply hoist it up to the height that it needs to be. Once you're at that height, then you're going to need to secure it. The easiest way to secure it in the field is by using what's called a frictionless hitch, or also known as a carabiner wrap. I'm going to show you that in this clip right here. So in putting together the carabiner wrap or the frictionless hitch, I'm going to use this leg of an entryway table to represent my trunk. Normally a tree trunk is obviously very rough, and so it will take fewer wraps around it to create the amount of friction you need in order to hold the bag up. But for a smooth surface like this, it might take many more wraps. The other thing that you might notice is that this actually relies a lot on friction, even though it's called the frictionless hitch. A better term would be the tensionless hitch, because the end piece of the cord that will have the carabiner is actually very loose. It doesn't actually create any tension when it clips to the load strand. So I actually also undid the figure 8 on a BIGHT and the carabiner that was at the end of my cord. And the reason I did that is because it's hard to predict where you're going to actually need to clip the load strand, or the load bearing strand, when you're done with your carabiner wrap. So I'm going to show you what that looks like now. Essentially, it's very simple. You just wrap the cord around the trunk 3, 4, 5 times. until you feel like it's not going to slip at all. And then if you don't already have a carabiner in place, at that point in time, you'll tie the figure 8 on a bight and then clip the carabiner to the load strand here. So taking this cord here, just going to start wrapping it around. And it doesn't have to be elegant, but you want to maintain the tension on that load strand because this is going up to the bear bag that is at the height that you want it to be. And a lot of times you might have your co-members in your group actually be holding this firm while you're wrapping. That's going to make it easy to wrap very quickly. And then you'll just continue to wrap. And usually you'll go over the load strand here. And you'll just continue to wrap. If you go under, it's not such a big deal, but going over will keep it in place better. And you'll continue to wrap. But as you can see now, I can actually let go of this and it's gonna stay in position. This isn't even tied to anything yet, but I wanna secure it, and the easiest way to secure it is tying my figure 8 on a bight. Attaching my carabiner to the figure 8 on a bight. And then if you're able to, go around one more time and then lock it in place. Now you'll see this strand over here, the strand that's actually clipped, there's no tension on it. That's why it's called the tensionless hitch or a carabiner wrap, is because this is loose. All of the friction in the system is actually inside the multiple wraps around the trunk. And that's what's gonna hold the bear bag in place. When you're finished the next morning or you need to get it down, it's extremely simple. You unlock and open up the carabiner, take it off of the load strand here. And I usually will actually take the carabiner off completely. You can even untie the figure 8 on a bight and you'll just start to unwrap. And it's important to actually have people holding here because as you're unwrapping, the friction will start to release. And if your bag's very heavy, it's gonna drop pretty quickly. So having some of your hiking buddies or your classmates holding that load strand is gonna be really helpful. But at the end of the day, you'll let it down and that's the end. Now let's move on to the counterbalance method. We're gonna start off at the point where we've already gotten the cord over the limb and you have your carabiner attached to the parachute cord. Now once again, you'll need to attach one of your bear bags to the carabiner and lock it. Now the counterbalance method relies on you having two bear bags of similar weight that you're going to use to, as the name describes, counterbalance each other. In order to do this, what you'll do is you will actually raise up the bag that is attached all the way until it can't go any further. So you're gonna be all the way at the limb. At that point in time, as high up as you can go, you're gonna tie a figure 8 on a bight. I'm gonna show you why this is in a moment. You're gonna tie a figure 8 on a bight, and then you're going to attach a carabiner to this point. So what I have here is I have the cord with the figure 8 on a bight and a carabiner, and then on the other end is the first bear bag. Now to this carabiner, you will attach your second bear bag. Now you want them to be about equal in weight. You'll attach your second bear bag, lock it in, and then what actually occurs next is you or somebody else in the team will take a long stick, a trekking pole, and actually start to push this bag up. And as I'm pushing this bag up, you can see that the other bag lowers. Once you get them to a height where they are equivalent, then you are done. With this method, it has the one advantage that you don't have to tie the free end off to a nearby tree, such as you have to do with the hoist method. This one relies simply on balancing and physics. It's quite elegant. The only part about it is it does take a little bit more nuance with actually hoisting it up with the trekking pole, but I like this method a lot personally. I think that it gets the job done very quickly, very effectively, and you don't have to tie this up. You don't have to do any additional work with the carabiner wrap. The next morning when you're ready to retrieve your bag, you simply hoist up one bag. The other bag you will take off of the carabiner. You will undo your figure 8 on a bight, or you could leave it. The only trouble is it might get caught up in the limb, but you can undo your figure 8 on a bight, and then you'll simply lower the other end and retrieve your second bag. So again, that's the counterbalance method. It takes a little bit more nuance, a little bit more thought. You need to have two bags that are roughly equal in weight, but it works really well, and that's the one that I prefer to use in the field if possible.